The Rebbe starts off the Sicha by saying that as it's known, the Geula of the Frierdiker Rebbe, from where he was sent away in Kastrama, was on Yud Beis Yud Gimel Tamuz. That is, Tuesday, Yud Beis Tamuz, the Frierdiker Rebbe was notified that an order had come to free him after the fact that he was sent away to Kastrama. But since on that day the official government office was closed because it was some form of a public holiday, so the official release documents would only be able to be given the following day, Wednesday, Yud Gimel Tamuz. Immediately on that Yud Beis Tamuz, the Frierdiker Rebbe said a Maimer Chassidus on the words, on the Pasuk, Havaya li ba'oizroi, va'ani ere b'soinoi. Hashem is amongst my helpers, and I will see. B'soinoi, we usually understand it as the downfall of my enemies, as we'll see later in the Sicha. The following day, after he was actually released, the Frierdiker Rebbe said a Maimer Chassidus that starts with the words Baruch HaGoyim L'Chayavim Toivois Shegmolani Toiv. This is the bracha that one makes after a miracle happens to him, after he's released from prison, etc. Now, the idea of the pasuk Havaya li ba'oizroi v'ani ere b'soinoi simply is a request for the future, that one is asking that it should be because Hashem li ba'oizroi, because Hashem is amongst my helpers, v'ani ere, so I will see, I should see the revenge of against my enemies, as opposed to Baruch HaGoyim L'Chayavim Toiv V'Shegmolani Toiv. This is praising and thanking Hashem for the past, for the good that Hashem has done for me. So the question is, usually we would understand how should it be when you get good news about being saved, about being rescued, about being released. Seemingly the first thing is to thank Hashem for the great news. And only then, seemingly, is there now room for another request regarding the future. And if that's the case, wouldn't it have been more appropriate that the first Maimer Chassidus should be Baruch HaGoyim? The Rebbe says, B'doichik, we could say, that since the Frierdiker Rebbe, when he heard the B'sura Toiva, he wasn't able to actually make the bracha of HaGoyim yet, since he wasn't actually completely freed yet. And surely you can't say that he completely had been out of all danger, which is when you would make the bracha. Therefore, it's not the appropriate time yet to say a Maimer Chassidus either that starts with these words, Baruch HaGoyim. But, says the Rebbe, there's still clarification needed, because it's definite and certain that even the good news about the release, even before you can make the bracha of HaGoyim, should still be bringing out praise and thanks to Hashem. So still the Frierdiker Rebbe could have said a Maimer with some other expression of praise and thanks, if not the words Baruch HaGoyim. And certainly that should be before starting making requests for the future, and especially this kind of request of Hashem li ba'oizroi v'ani ere b'soinoi. In order to explain this, the Rebbe first has a look at the general idea of what happened by the Frierdiker Rebbe's Geula. And the Rebbe says, generally speaking, in addition to the fact that the actual Geula of the Frierdiker Rebbe was a tremendous miracle, there was also some other individual or specific miracles that happened at the same time along with it. Amongst these things, says the Rebbe, there's one particular aspect that even though at the time no one really paid much attention to it, but now, after so many years, when we think this in a calm way, thinking about it deliberately, we start realizing that really it was the most tremendous miracle, which doesn't have any room at all in nature. And that is, the way things worked back in that country, referring to Russia, the citizens of the people were constantly being looked at and followed by the government. And the Rebbe says that's the situation even now, and the Rebbe was saying and giving and editing the Sicha. Certainly back then, and especially in connection to the arrest of the Frierdiker Rebbe, by which there was lots of investigations going on and lots of searches going on, and they were following anyone that had any sort of connection to the Frierdiker Rebbe. They were following them and watching them, as the expression is, b'sheva einayim, with 7 eyes, following every move that they were making. And nevertheless, as soon as it became public knowledge that the Frierdiker Rebbe was arrested, Says the Rebbe, there were tens of Yidden, many Yidden, completely threw themselves into with doing various different activities and ishtadlus, putting in various different types of efforts to have the Frierdiker Rebbe released. And they didn't take into consideration the fact that they are being spied on, that they're being watched. They didn't look at all of the dangerous results that could end up happening as a result of this. And they were doing this in an open way. They were sending letters with their names on it. And furthermore, says the Rebbe, they themselves turned to various different government officials, which were responsible for the verdict and doing in all sorts of efforts to try to influence them. And nevertheless, says the Rebbe, we see an amazing thing, a wondrous thing, that amongst all the people that put in the effort and tried for the Frierdiker Rebbe, there was not a single one of them that all of this should harm them in any way whatsoever. Not in matters of life, not in matters of just regarding their physical bodies weren't hurt, and not even in monetary matters or in Yanim of Parnasa. No one was harmed in any way by doing whatever they can for the Frierdiker Rebbe. The Rebbe says, yes, we know it's true that we have a klal, a rule that shluchei mitzvah ein nizoken, that generally messengers doing a mitzvah, agents doing a mitzvah are not going to be harmed. But the Gemara says that if it's a case where there is danger involved, clear danger involved, then you can't really apply this rule in the same way. In that particular case, for those Yidden, there was definitely this idea, shchicha hezeka, that it's very common to be hurt in this sort of situation. Says that in the full meaning of the word, or even more than that. In other words, it was very dangerous. So you can't really apply this idea of shluchim mitzvah ein nizoken. And yet they weren't hurt. Says the Rebbe, the wonder is even greater than this. In the time before the imprisonment, and so too after the imprisonment, there were plenty of people that were connected to the Frierdiker Rebbe, and yet that was harmful for them, begashmius. The Rebbe says, beruchnius, obviously any connection to the Frierdiker Rebbe only elevated them higher, and shaloi be'erech, higher than they would have been on their own. But physically, there were plenty of people that did suffer because of their activities with the Frierdiker Rebbe. And yet, in regards to this ishtadlus, regarding to these efforts that were made for the release of the Frierdiker Rebbe and his geula, this did not harm anyone as mentioned. Not even during the time of the imprisonment, meaning before the miracle actually happened of the release and the geula, when the sakana, when the danger was still in full force, and surely not that it didn't harm them after the time of the geula, and also in later times, even after the Frierdiker Rebbe left Russia. The Rebbe says another point to add, that in a certain sense, this miracle is even greater than the miracle of the geula itself. And even as far as calculations of nature. And the Rebbe explains, even though the geula of the Frierdiker Rebbe was clearly an open miracle, nevertheless, it was somehow still related to, somehow still connected in some sort of garment, in some sort of cover of nature. Because it did come through ishtadlus, through various different efforts in using the ways and means of nature, through various different people with great influence, both within Russia, as well as people from out of Russia. However, regarding those people that we're speaking about before, the people that try to do everything they can for the Frierdiker Rebbe, especially those people that went to all these various different places and the offices of the highest order in order to request that the Frierdiker Rebbe should be released, logically speaking, it doesn't make any sense at all why they weren't hurt. So that's as far as calculations based on nature, based on Gashmias, logical calculations. That in a certain sense, this is a greater miracle. So too says the Rebbe Beruchni Yisayanyanim, it's obvious that the geula of the Frierdiker Rebbe is connected with the fact that he has the schus of his Mesiras Nefesh for strengthening Torah, spreading Torah, strengthening Yiddishkeit, spreading Yiddishkeit. Obviously connected with the schus of his own ancestors, the Rabbeim, and many other merits. And nevertheless, even with all those merits, the geula came after he had so much pain and suffering. He sat in jail, and all the suffering that he suffered there, and then he was sent away into Golos, etc., etc. Whereas all of these people that put in their efforts and tried whatever they can for the release of the Frierdiker Rebbe, these are people that included quite a number of people that didn't have any Mesiras Nefesh for matters of Torah and Mitzvah, so they don't have those chusim. They had people that in their private lives weren't even keeping Torah and Mitzvahs. Some of them belong to various different political parties, the communist parties, etc. The Rebbe doesn't specify which parties, the Rebbe says parties. And nevertheless, all of their efforts didn't harm them in any way, and it all went through smooth. Based on all of this, says the Rebbe, now we can explain that how was this really achieved, this amazing miracle? This all happened by the Frierdiker Rebbe saying this mimer. In other words, the Frierdiker Rebbe was explaining, or actually he is achieving it through saying this mimer, or perhaps both things together. When the Frierdiker Rebbe says this mimer, immediately after being notified about the Geula, he says this mimer on explaining the pasuk Havaya Libo Israel. What does the Frierdiker Rebbe say in this mimer? So right in the beginning of the mimer, the Frierdiker Rebbe asks a question on those words, Hashem Libo Israel, Hashem is amongst my helpers. And he asks that at first glance, it sounds like from the pasuk, the person has many helpers, and Hashem is amongst the helpers. How does that make sense? The truth is that Ein Oid Mulvade, there's absolutely nothing besides for Hashem. Hashem is obviously the only creator. Hashem is the one that helps a person and does everything for him. As the Rambam writes, Yesoida Yesoides V'Amud HaChochma is the foundation of all foundations, the pillar of all wisdoms. Leida Sheyashem Motzidishim, to know that there's this first entity, this first being, and that everything, all existence, only comes from the truths of Hashem's Metzias. So this is what the Frierdiker Rebbe discusses in the beginning of the Maimer, that in truth there is nothing besides for Hashem. And therefore the Frierdiker Rebbe is asking, what does it mean? Hashem li bo Israel, Hashem is amongst my helpers. Now the Rebbe does mention briefly over here also what the answer of the Frierdiker Rebbe is. I'm going to get to this answer later in the Sicha as well. But really what the Rebbe's focus is right now going to be in this first part that we just mentioned already, where the Frierdiker Rebbe is clarifying that in truth there's nothing besides for Hashem. At the end of the Maimer, the Frierdiker Rebbe explains that Oizroi is referring to the birurim, to those sparks that we elevate through our avodah. They are the true helpers of a person. The Frierdiker Rebbe says this is similar to the idea of one's talmidim, one's students that are called his children. This is again something that Rebbe is going to elaborate more at the end of the Sicha, how that's connected. And Hashem libo Oizroi means, Havaya libo Oizroi, the Frierdiker Rebbe explains, means that we, through our avodah, we cause that even in all of these helpers, there should be the gilui of Shem Havaya. Again, this will be touched on a little bit later in the Sicha. But back to the main point that the Rebbe is focusing on over here is, again, back to the previous point, that the whole beginning of the Maimer is focusing on this idea that in truth, there's only Hashem. And everything comes from Hashem. Says the Rebbe, it is with these words that the Frierdiker Rebbe, in a certain sense, is giving a psak din of Torah. He's paskening according to Torah. And he's saying it in a framework of Torah, in a Maimer Chassidus. He's saying it as part of Torah, Pnimiyas HaTorah, which is called Chachma Sahem, is the true Chachma. The Frierdiker Rebbe is over here paskening regarding all of those that put in the effort for him in this, to release him, to free him, that even though, yes, at first glance it seems like they are the helpers, as the Frierdiker Rebbe says regarding the pasuk, it sounds like there are other helpers. It seems like they are the helpers helping him out of this open danger, b'derech hateva, for danger for the helper, and therefore seemingly, if they are in fact the helpers and it's dangerous for them, so seemingly they would need to have amazing great merits to be able to be protected, to be able to be saved, especially the type of protection that absolutely nothing should harm them in any way, no impact should be at all. But what's the Frierdiker Rebbe saying? But the truth of the matter is that Einoid Mulvadoi. It seems like they are the helpers, and therefore they need protection. But really, it's Einoid Mulvadoi. There's no one besides Hashem. Only Hashem is the creator. Only Hashem is the one that's helping the Yid. So all of the help is coming only from Hu Levadihu, from the one Hashem, who there is no one besides for him. Says the Rebbe, so right over here, we're standing in an open and revealed way. By the Frierdiker Rebbe saying the Maimer, that all the help the Frierdiker Rebbe is getting in truth is only from Hu Levadi, who is only coming from Hashem himself. And that ends up expressing itself in an open way by these oizrim, by all these people that actually helped along. That is, how is it felt by them? How is it seen by them? All of these people that put in all the efforts for the Frierdiker Rebbe didn't do it with any calculated logic and with any sort of logical hope of, what's going to end up being. Rather, each one of these people were literally moiser nefesh. They weren't taking anything into consideration. They went in very, very dangerous ways. that maybe they'll be able to at least somehow lighten the imprisonment, somehow maybe even hopefully helping to the Geula. In other words, they're putting themselves completely aside, and therefore their whole mitzvahs, their whole existence is like not taking up any space. And therefore within their activities, they're now they're enabling that it can be expressed begilui, that it's not about them and their help, but rather it's coming from Hu Levadayu, it's only about the Eibishter. It's Hashem doing it. Says the Rebbe, so now it's easy to understand and simple to understand why this didn't harm anyone in any way whatsoever, and not even later, because really this help is coming directly from Hu Levadayu, from the Hashem himself, from Amitas Imotzi, from the true existence of Hashem, and therefore obviously no one could do anything, no one could impact anything, no one could touch or harm anything. Furthermore, the Rebbe says you don't even need a nes, a miracle, that these people shouldn't be harmed. Because al pi teva, according to nature, it's impossible to touch, to affect, to harm Amitas Imotzi, the truth of Hashem's existence. And therefore, says the Rebbe, so the truth is that if we really want to think about it, how it's in reality, it's not even as if these people are putting themselves into a dangerous situation, and therefore you need a tremendous miracle to be protected. Because again, this is what's happening over here is that it's begilui. In a revealed way, it's coming from Amitas Imotzi, from the truth of Hashem's existence. It's only coming through certain people, it's actually coming down. So, and therefore, there's no room lechatchila. From the outset, there's no possibility that it should harm anyone in any way whatsoever. In other words, it's just the nature of things. Of course, that's the way it has to be. The Rebbe now turns to the other side. The Rebbe says at the same time, we also have to clarify that if that's the case, you could maybe come now to the conclusion and say, so maybe these people don't even need to get chas v'shalom any reward, any payment for what they did. Because it's as if what they did is not even attributed to them. It's only Amitas Imotzi, it's Hashem doing it. Einoid Milvadi, there's no one besides Hashem, and therefore there's nothing even to talk about these people. But the truth of the matter is we know that Ein HaKadosh Baruch Hu Mekapeach Schar Kol Beri, Hashem does not deprive any creature from the reward that they are due, especially how much more so of such people that were moiser nefesh in their efforts to release the Frierdiker Rebbe and to bring about his Gula, that of course they get tremendous reward. Says the Rebbe, this is what the Frierdiker Rebbe actually is preempting this issue by bringing at the end of the Maimer when he's explaining the words Havaya li ba'ozroi. And this is what the Frierdiker Rebbe says. We quoted it before, and now we're going to elaborate a little bit more on this. Oizroi, who are the helpers? These are birurim hamizbarim. These are the sparks that get elevated through our avodah. The Rebbe says this is similar to what says in the Mishnah. It's in Pirkei Avos. So oisa mitzvah. When a person does a mitzvah, koina loy praklit, he's acquiring for himself a malach, a defending angel that's going to help him. In other words, from the mitzvah, a malach is created, it's going to assist the person. And the Frierdiker Rebbe adds the words, al derech, this is similar to Talmidim, which are called bonim. Talmidim are called children. And the Rebbe asks, what's the connection of that idea that Talmidim are called bonim to this idea of Havaya li ba'ozroi? Says the Rebbe, it's with these few words that the Frierdiker Rebbe is coming to emphasize that the words Hashem li ba'ozroi remains also in the simple and literal sense. In other words, that yes, there are oizrim, there are many helpers. It's true, there are helpers. And helpers in the literal sense, there are these Yidden that did help him. And in that way, by helping him in a certain sense, they are becoming his Talmidim, they're becoming his students, they're becoming his children. They are oizrim, they are his helpers. And the reason for that is because since a Yid does have Bechira Chavshis, a Yid does have free choice, and they chose to be involved in this ishtadlus and this effort for the Frierdiker Rebbe, this is why they are called oizroi, and they do get the fullest reward and payment. And nevertheless, this is no contradiction to that which we were speaking about earlier, what the Frierdiker Rebbe writes in the beginning of the Maimer, that Einoid Mulvadi, there's no one besides for Hashem, and only Hashem is the creator, only Hashem is the one that helps a Yid. Because Havaya li be'oizroi. What does that mean? Frierdiker Rebbe brings in the end of the Maimer, and again, we mentioned this earlier, that what Havaya li be'oizroi means, Hashem, Havaya is shining, and should be shining. The Gili of Shem Havaya should be shining into these oizroi, into these helpers. That means that the one that could really achieve the help is, of course, Havaya, and he's shining into and expressing himself into these Oizra, into these people that are putting in the efforts. Says the Rebbe, now we could also understand why the Frierdiker Rebbe says this Maimer, Havaya Libo Oizra, before the Maimer Baruch HaGoimel. Because number one, the Frierdiker Rebbe wants to ensure that from all of the good that the Frierdiker Rebbe benefited, Baruch, the Tov Shek Molani, the benefit that the Frierdiker Rebbe gets, but Chaz v'Shalom, no one else should be harmed by it, especially those that put themselves out and tried so much for the rescue of the Frierdiker Rebbe. And that not only they shouldn't be harmed, as we said, but on the contrary, they get the full reward. And that's understood from this whole concept of Havaya Libo Oizroi. And therefore, this comes number one by the Frierdiker Rebbe before he's going to say the next Maimer and thanking Hashem for all the good that Hashem has done for him. Says the Rebbe, in this Maimer, in the beginning of the Maimer, after the Frierdiker Rebbe discusses the first part of the pasuk Havaya Libo Oizroi, the Frierdiker Rebbe also deals with the next part, Vani Ere B'Soinoi. Now, Vani Ere B'Soinoi simply means I will see the revenge against my enemies. And the question is, why is the Frierdiker Rebbe, why is David HaMelech, what's this idea of asking revenge of the enemies? Seemingly, the request should be that these enemies should turn into people that are your friends, that love you, people that are close to you. And the Frierdiker Rebbe adds in his question, remember this is a pasuk that David HaMelech says in Tehillim. So the Frierdiker Rebbe says, although David's hate was only to those that are the haters, the enemies of Hashem, as the pasuk says, another pasuk in Tehillim, Haloi misanecha havaya esno, I hate those that hate you, and it's against those that stand up against you. Those are the ones that I'm going to fight with. But nevertheless, on the other hand, we also have a concept where we have another pasuk in Tehillim where it says, Yitamu chatoim min haaretz, that all sin should be completely gone from the world. And the Razal, the Gemara says, it says chatoim, the sin should be gone from the world, not the choitim, the sinners. We want that the sinners should do tshuva. So what's this idea of ani ere b'soinoi, seeing the revenge against the enemies? So as we're going to see, the Rebbe is going to translate ani ere b'soinoi in a different way. But the Rebbe says like this. The Rebbe says we can explain that with these words vani ere b'soinoi, the Frierdiker Rebbe is coming to deal with another aspect connected to his Gula, which comes even before, and again has to come before even Hagoimel. But here we're speaking about in the opposite extreme. Here we're going to speak about those people that got up against the Frierdiker Rebbe. Those people that arrested the Frierdiker Rebbe and caused them such tremendous suffering. And not only physical suffering, but more importantly, Yisurei HaNefesh, spiritual suffering of the Neshama. They were trying to disturb his Avodas Hashem, especially while he was sitting in prison. So they are definitely in this category of Misanecha Hashem Esna, is those that hate Hashem, the enemies of Hashem. And therefore, seemingly, it would have been appropriate that after the victory over them, there should be an attitude of Ani Ere B'Soinoi in the literal sense. I will see the downfall against my enemies, a matter of Nekama. Not obviously a personal Nekama, Chas v'Shalom, but this is Hashem's Nekama. Misanecha Havaya, these are the enemies of Hashem. And this is actually what the Frierdiker Rebbe is trying to negate in the beginning of the Maimer. That even those people that are the enemies, even those people that are Misanecha Havaya, those are the enemies and those that hate Hashem. But what should our request be for them? Not Ere B'Soinoi in the literal way. That means that see the downfall of the enemies or the destruction of the enemies. Rather, as said before, really it has to be Yitamu chatoim v'loi choitim. We want the sin to be gone, not the sinner. We need a daven that they should do tshuva. The sinners should do tshuva. We'll soon see how that's in the words Vani Ere B'Soinoi. Says the Rebbe, so this is the connection between these two parts on the pasuk. When we realize in the first part of the pasuk, Havaya Libo Oizroi, that really there's no one besides for Hashem. Hashem is the only one that helps. Havaya Libo Oizroi, that even in the Oizroi it's all Hashem shining. Then you also come to the recognition, to the truth, that even the Soine, even when you have an enemy, it's not Chas v'Shalom that he has some ability, he has some power. This itself is also coming from Hashem. The Rebbe brings what it says, what the Rebbe elaborates in Igeres HaKodesh, a pasuk also that David HaMelech said regarding someone that cursed him. David HaMelech says, Ki Havaya Amar Lo Yikalel. Hashem is the one that told him to curse me. In other words, Hashem is the one that gave him the ability to curse me. And therefore, if we realize that, there's no room at all to chas v'shalom have a feeling of revenge, as the Alter Rebbe discusses in Igeres HaKodesh there. And that's where the Friedrich Rebbe is also coming to negate in this Pirush of Ani Ere B'Soine, that it's not chas v'shalom that we want to see some revenge against the enemy. So what is Vani Ere B'Soine? So the Rebbe again brings something that the Friedrich Rebbe says in the end of the Maimer. There he speaks about the idea of Re'iyah, of being able to see things. Brings famous Maimer Chazal, Eizeh Chacham Haroye Es HaNoilad. Who's considered a Chacham? Haroye Es HaNoilad, the one who could see. Es HaNoilad, which Chassidus usually translates, in other words, you could see the way things are being created. Yesh Mayayin, you could see godliness. The Friedrich Rebbe says, in order to come to the darga of Re'iyah, V'ani Ere, in order to come to a higher level in Avodas Hashem, this darga called Re'iyah, of seeing godliness, that comes bisoinoi, through the opposition. In other words, not only the enemy doesn't bring out a feeling of nekama, of revenge, on the contrary, knowing that when you encounter some sort of opposition, some sort of enemy, and you know that it's coming mulmaila, coming from above, and that the other person is only a shliach of Hashem, again going back to the pasuk that David HaMelech says, Hashem is the one that told him to do this, then we always try to find, and we do find, what's the hayra mulmaila, what's the message to me in my personal avodah. To the extent that you have it in a way of re'iyah, of actual absolute clarity, like re'iyah, like seeing something, that you come to the conclusion that everything was only that I should get to a higher level in avodas Hashem, this avodah that's called re'iyah, v'ani ere. Says the Rebbe, so it's only after that you feel this idea of havaya li ba'oizroi, v'ani ere b'soinoi, in the ultimate way, in both of these details. And also, in other words, both the oizroi, the helpers, as well as the enemies. We recognize that it's all havayali, that it's all coming from Hashem. Because Einoid Mulvadi, there's nothing besides for Hashem. Then you can come in the most perfect way to Baruch HaGoimel, etc. Shegmolani Toiv, that you feel that the Gmolani, that all the good is coming from Hashem himself. And it comes down in open good and revealed good, but Toiva Nirva Niglo Lamatam Asarat Vachim, down to earth. Until, as the expression of the Friedrich Rebbe, that even Machzikei Torah, all of the supporters of Torah, are fortunate and blessed, bechol tuv, with all good.